Companies are always wanting more. As a result, once upon a time, for example at Skoda, after the Yeti came the much bigger Kodiaq. Later, for example at Volkswagen, they looked at the Tiguan and then made the much bigger Allspace and now the Terramar. But when a similar idea came up at Cupra, no one there reached for a longer ruler to add 20 cm to the Formentor. Oh no. Instead, he went for a coffee, went to downtown Barcelona, because that's where Cupra's headquarters are, sat in a cafe on La Rambla, ordered a cortado, and instead of counting trunk liters, he started thinking about the meaning of life. And that's how the Terramar was created, which was supposed to be bigger, but instead of growing, it matured. What's fascinating about this car is that, while it was meant to be bigger than the Formentor and is slightly longer, it's really not about size. The Terramar is just a few centimeters longer. And here, in every detail, you can see that this car was designed by people who were thinking primarily about proportions, not just about suitcases. And even though, yes, they wanted to create a bigger car, they resisted the temptation to make a boxy dadmobile and instead went for a sporty look and sporty driving emotions. You might want to say, whether that's the case, I'll tell you in a moment, during the driving impressions. But now, looking at the engine lineup itself, we can see the search for a golden mean, for excitement, and for emission standards. We offer a 2-liter gasoline engine with 204 horsepower or 265 with all-wheel drive plus a 150 horsepower mild hybrid and a 1.5. Finally, 2 new plug-ins offer over 100 kilowatts electric range, a 204 HP version and a top 272 HP model with 50 kilowatt of charging. When it comes to power, the fastest version is the one with the more powerful 2-liter engine and all-wheel drive. We have 5.9 seconds. Terramar is more about electricity and low fuel consumption than just power. And although the vast majority of customers will probably find their version here, it's a pity that there isn't, even just for image purposes, a top version with 300 horsepower. But times are changing. Terramar is more eco-friendly, and apparently, it's the last of the Cupra models with hybrids. As the Spaniards say, this model is supposed to be a bridge to a new era of mobility, but we'll see how it turns out. I think that if they ever change their mind, no one will cry about it. My test car is the less powerful plug-in, but less powerful doesn't mean weak. 204 horsepower, 350 Nm. In theory, with front-wheel drive, that should get you from 0 to 60 in 8.3 seconds. And here, theory matches up quite nicely with practice, because in reality, I managed to do it half a second better, half a second faster. I measured it several times consistently at 7.7 and a little bit more. And I'm wondering, maybe in another car I would ask this question, and I guess I should ask it here too. Isn't it possible that this press fleet car is tuned up a lot? But in the case of this brand, I actually feel like it even fits. More excitement, but it is what it is. I measured it while driving on electricity, since I'm currently driving through Warsaw in traffic on electric power. In fact, I've been using electricity since this morning, trying to drain the battery. The battery has over 25 kilowatt gross, which in theory, according to the manufacturer, allows you to drive from 110 up to even 123 kilometers on electricity alone. And then, according to Worldwide Harmonized Light Vehicles test procedure, the fuel consumption is something absurd, below 1 liter, but in practice, it all depends on the specific mix. You'll find my measurements in this video a bit later. And yes, when it comes to technical details, here we have the 1.5 turbocharged stratified injection, which has constant power regardless of the plug-in version, because the more powerful 272 horsepower plug-in has exactly the same combustion engine. However, the electric one is much more powerful, although even the more powerful one still has only an evolutionary drive, exclusively on the front axle. I also have my own theory about this, but I'll talk about it during the driving impressions. In a moment, you'll also see the rules inside. It doesn't get bigger, and it's cozier here than spacious, and I think Cupra customers should actually appreciate that. I'll get back to that in a moment. In the 2-meter test, yes, I'm sitting a bit higher than in the recently tested Formentor, but I still have that same compact, sporty seating position. I don't feel like I'm in an SUV here at all, but more like in a sports car. I mentioned this a few months ago about the new Octavia, repeated it with the new Formentor, and I'll say it again. A well-equipped version of a new car doesn't have to have a huge television. 13 inches is enough to handle everything, and you really don't need more. This particular model, as I said, is well equipped, but I don't feel like I'm in National Aeronautics and Space Administration headquarters, surrounded by huge screens. So, according to the principle, instead of more, better. And here it's better, which I also emphasize in the Formentor, because here there's a new server, a multimedia system where everything works really super smoothly and super fast. The designers here were given free rein and had a good time. Let's start with the shapes. So yes, one layer, another layer, a third layer. Here you go. Hands off. This is the driver's spot. Look how clearly it's marked. And everything here is so unconventional, not rectangular. Everything is like, something's happening here, even here. Look. The screen is slightly angled towards the driver. So here Cupra is clearly indicating that this car is meant for the driver. Look. Even here, in this little corner on the left side, what could be happening here? And here we have this, right? One layer, another layer with the air vent for the windshield. It overlaps with another vent at a certain angle. That's how it all looks. Gaudi was here. I'm probably exaggerating, but my first thought is that someone was inspired, since the headquarters is in Barcelona. Anyway, it's not trivial, it's not obvious, it's definitely not boring. So like I said, someone had a good time here. Also, when it comes to the seats, look, these are optional seats. They have good side support. They look nice, and overall they're comfortable. And this particular model also has good audio. And finally, I said they had a good time. The designers, both in terms of shapes and colors, did a great job. Of course, the only right color is copper, but notice that these are the most visible copper elements. And basically, besides that, well, we also have these colors by the air vents, but apart from that, everything is pretty subtle. Here a little frame, here a little line, here a little frame, here a little line. And that's basically it. They didn't go overboard with the copper color. Although the temptation was probably there, everything is done in good taste, with good style, just right. The only thing I could complain about here is this door handle. To be consistent, I have to mention it because I complained about it a lot in L-Rock. It's not very comfortable or obvious. I'd prefer a regular handle here. However, unlike Skoda, this one looks better on the outside. In this visible part, because we have leather here, we have nice stitching here, and under the stitching, under this leather, there's actually quite a bit of foam. So let's say your thumb lands on a pretty pleasant finish, but on the hidden side, it's just regular, smooth plastic, so it's better than in the L-Rock. Definitely, but I would still prefer to have a classic, regular handle. And when it comes to the choice of materials, the whole cockpit is finished with soft touch surfaces. Interestingly, on the driver's side, it feels very premium, but on the passenger's side, it gives a bit less. Yes, it's strange because I don't even see a transition between the left and right side, but clearly this car is more driver-oriented. Lower down, we get to a hard plastic with an interesting pattern, and even lower, there's a material that gives a little under your finger. Then we return to that familiar pattern and back to the familiar material that still gives nicely under your finger. And this also extends to the left edge, where your knee can rest, and here too, it gives nicely under your finger. The doors are softly finished at the top, then softly finished one level lower, and here we have nice lighting, because look, it lights up. The left armrest is actually very even soft, and the right armrest is also very comfortable. Plus, you can adjust its height, as you can see. And now we move on to pulling. So we pull this and nothing happens. Here, the plastic is sticking out. Well, something does happen. If I pull really hard, I can get some sound out of it. Here, the lower layer, nothing. The air vents, a very weak point, very hard to do well, but it was done well. Here we have these 3D shapes, there's something to grab onto, so it's going to be harder. And here, silence, and here too, silence, and here it creaked once, you heard it, but silence, here they are. Oh look, but silence didn't settle here. Notice that under the roof, we actually have another, kind of like a little roof, a border, which gives me a chance to produce some sounds. And it did make a tiny crack when I pressed it, but now it's settled and there's silence. Here, Let's see how Gaudi managed. Silence. And finally, this unfortunate handle, silence. So I would say it's good. Next, the storage compartments. A spot for a phone, space for 2 cups, and a compartment under the armrest that's just the right size. Here's a tiny compartment, not really sure what it's for, and the door pockets are quite spacious, but they're finished with hard materials. The promised test for a 2-meter tall person. First, take a look at the range of steering wheel adjustment. You can really pull it up high and close. I think that's a common denominator for a lot of cars from the Volkswagen group. I can easily position myself relative to the steering wheel. The electric seat with memory offers a wide range of adjustment. I'm positioned correctly, and I still have about 3 fingers of free space above my head, even though there's a sunroof here that takes away a few more centimeters. So, yes, Ulusu, although it's hard to beat the Formentor was really well organized. Here, it's just as good. Look, the console is concave in front of the driver's knees, which allows me to slide under the steering wheel as far as I want. Actually, I'm not even using all that space yet. I fit here without any problem. I still have a couple of centimeters of space left, and that's good because there's a pretty hard shell under the seat. Remember, it's lowered as much as possible and set to a position that's good for me. There's still plenty of space, really with room to spare, and above my head I have about 2 fingers of space, but I still don't have to slouch. We also have the option to adjust the angle of the seat back. Here you have a few settings, from a cargo position to one that's not quite for sleeping, but definitely for comfortable traveling. And for amenities, we have a 3rd climate control zone, 2 USB-C ports, a comfortable armrest with 2 cup holders, reading lights, and a large sunroof overhead. But on the other hand, there are no pockets behind the seats, and the door pockets are very deep, but not very spacious. We can also mention the central tunnel, which may not be very wide, but it's quite high. But on the other hand, when it comes to aesthetic touches, we have these extra copper accents here, for example on the air vents, or these stylish and color-matched door handles, as well as the distinctive lighting on the door panels. In the back seat, 3 things stand out. First, the extra pockets, which may compensate for the missing pockets behind the front seats. The fact that the rear seat can be adjusted forward and backward, look, in quite a wide range. This also changes the trunk capacity by 90 liters. And finally, the ISOFIX mount is very close and convenient, but unfortunately, the cover is a separate piece of plastic. Once you remove it, you have to put it somewhere. And now, let's take a look at the trunk. Here we see 400 liters, which isn't a bad value for a plug-in. Besides that, you can increase this number by 90 liters, so the maximum capacity of this trunk is 490. After moving the front seat all the way forward, here I showed you how it could look by moving the left part. By the way, I also folded down the ski pass-through, which actually isn't just an opening, but an entire segment in the middle. Besides that, under the floor, we have a solid, typically Volkswagen-style floor. We basically have the plug-in components here, and I don't think this space is suitable for putting anything in, because there are cables here and I'm afraid you could accidentally damage something. So no, I don't recommend it. And finally, here on the left we have a 12.5 and a 235 outlet. And this is some ventilation for more plug-in components. And here on the right side, a very cleverly custom-made pouch fits perfectly into this compartment with the repair kit. Light, hook, light. On the other hand, it's not an obvious thing, but let's say we're aiming for a really very comfortable and, honestly, despite the plug-in practical trunk. Now, the visibility of the pillars, they're not too thick and they're not too close to the driver's eyes, so they don't limit visibility. The side mirrors are half actual mirror and half plastic, as you can see. But let's say, from the driver's perspective, it doesn't make a difference because you look above it, so I'm not complaining. However, the interior mirror is more or less at the driver's eye level, so you have to lean down a bit to regain visibility there. On the right side, it's a bit worse. Look, the mirror is practically fused with the pillar, and here too, quite a large section is blocked. Considering that only the right half is actually useful for me. Look at the back, what a big window. It definitely makes up for the thick C-pillar. And yes, but the rear window isn't very slanted, and basically that's where the car ends. So from a maneuvering perspective, I don't think there will be a problem. Here, as you can see, we also have a bird's eye view reversing camera. We can choose different options here, just like we know from Volkswagen, and we also have plenty of other options. So I think we won't have any trouble finding our way around the parking lot. And this is what the lighting looks like at night. Look at the steering wheel, everything is illuminated under the steering wheel, the paddles are illuminated, the gear selector lever, the buttons under the steering wheel are also illuminated, as well as those on the doors and even the pockets. Notice that even the buttons down here for opening the fuel cap and the trunk are illuminated as well. We have these side panels, look very nice, and of course these colors can change. Here on the left side, that's about it. Starting at the height of the steering wheel, there's a light strip that runs across the entire console all the way to the right side. The footwells are illuminated, and the storage compartments here on the right for charging your phone, the USB-C ports, as well as the compartment under the armrest and the one in front of the driver are also illuminated. So, adding to that these ambient strips, which are atmospheric and mood setting, not too visible, basically create a certain mood. And of course, you have the option to change everything as you wish. Or we can also switch to individual mode and define separate colors for different areas. For example, here we can set red, why not, there you go, and here we'll leave purple, and that's it. Additionally, of course, we can adjust the brightness, and you see, now I know why the footwell lighting is so subtle. Because you can probably turn it up a bit, and you can also set the brightness for that. And here, there are really a lot of options. So I would say, what actually makes this car different from a premium one? The door handles aren't illuminated. Here the cup holders can be illuminated, and basically everything on the rear doors lights up too. Look up here at the headliner, all the buttons are illuminated, and we've even got a light in the sun visor. And a few more words about fuel consumption here. After the battery was depleted, driving around the city very calmly, and you could say very economically, I got a result of around 5 liters. As you can see, however, completely normal driving, even sporty driving in performance or Cupra mode, reached 7.5 liters. After the battery died, I'll say it again. However, with a fully charged battery running on electricity, I had consumption around 20-23 kilowatts in the city, and outside the city it depends on the pace. It could be 15 or 25, and you can now see the results from the route at 120 on the screen. Time for driving impressions, and I'll start with what this car probably likes the most, corners. I think just from the corners alone, you can tell how much Cupra cared about making sure the Terramar didn't just become a box for carrying suitcases. Of course, they wanted to give more space, more possibilities, but they also wanted this car to still love corners and for the driver to love them too. And it does that perfectly. In fact, there's an opportunity here to do a moose test. 50 kilometers per hour left, right? The tire squeals. Well, it's a winter tire, nothing we can do about that. But the way it throws itself to the left and how willingly it comes back. Of course, the Formentor, if it were the VZ version, which I haven't driven, but I assume it would make an even better impression. But here, honestly, there's nothing to complain about. Here we have a profile called Comfort. In general, the range of driving profiles isn't particularly wide, but it's substantial because we have Comfort. The next one right away is Performance, and just above it is Cupra. You'd want to pick Cupra immediately. Step on the gas. But it's the sound that makes driving in Cupra mode a bit of a compromise for me, because it forces me to listen to that artificial sound. However, just knowing that it's artificial makes me look for a way to turn it off, and this car gives you that option. Well, there's also an individual mode here, and in individual mode we have dynamic chassis control settings, which above the Cupra setting have 3 more notches to the right that make the suspension even stiffer than in Cupra mode. In practice, I tried it on corners, and I don't really feel a big difference when it comes to road grip. Here, the winter tires probably set the limit and the barrier earlier, but the road definitely feels less smooth. But it's nice that we can take the individual mode and push it even further than Cupra. It actually looks pretty good. Besides that, we can set the steering system to Cupra mode, the engine to Cupra mode, and the engine sound to comfort mode. And here we can step on the gas and enjoy the acceleration. Okay, the acceleration may not be exactly rocket-like here, but when it comes to corners, definitely here. I think this acceleration shouldn't be judged only by the 0 to 100 time. The key thing is to distinguish the role of the electric motor, which makes us change speeds within those city ranges when driving around town. Somewhere around 30 to 50 in such a responsive way that it feels like in practice this car is more powerful, and it's really just a matter of how responsive the electric motor's contribution is. Volkswagen, as I mentioned before in my shorts, places the electric motors in plug-in hybrids in front of the gearbox. So basically, even on electric power, you're still revving, right? The gears in the gearbox too, and the system can even change the gear. It's not like it will change gears as often as if it were running on a combustion engine, which of course has its own limitations when it comes to the rev range. And here we can clearly hear the gears changing, right? We have another one and another one, but if, for example, we started from a very low speed using only electricity here in comfort mode, and we're driving and accelerating. Not up to 160 I arrived, but there was no gear change, so here's the gearbox. With an electric motor, whose nature is to spin from 0 to high RPMs, it doesn't actually have to waste time and energy unnecessarily changing gears. Which doesn't change the fact that this possibility exists, and from what I've analyzed, it does actually happen sometimes. Here's a fun fact. A 100-kilometer range is completely realistic. In the city, I was getting results around 20 to 23 kW at most in traffic jams. So considering that we have a battery, I think it's around 24 kW gross. Mathematically, that's 100 km in the worst case scenario. If we drive calmly at 70 to 90 km/h on a road outside the city, we can see 15 kilobos and go farther on electricity. And then there's the manufacturer's claim, well, you just need to have good intentions. By the way, an interesting fact, in the plug-in version, the more powerful one with 272 horsepower, the electric motor is much stronger accordingly, but the combustion engine is exactly the same, so the difference is only in the electric motor. And all that difference is on the axle, so you also have to keep in mind that it's still just one axle, front-wheel drive. I suppose that losing traction on wet asphalt with the more powerful plug-in might be a relatively normal occurrence. To sum up, that person on La Rambla in Barcelona, of course, it's a totally fictional story. Thought up by me. If it really happened, then he thought it through well. The car that was ultimately created really didn't exceed the customer's expectations. The Cupra is still a car that loves to drive, loves to turn, and gives you that driving pleasure, while at the same time the car is more spacious and practical than the Formentor. So you could say the assumptions have been met, and I was about to finish, but actually I just thought of something else. And while driving at 120 you can listen, although the microphones probably won't capture it, but it really is quieter than in the Formentor. Of course, this is a more expensive car, a slightly higher class, and also newer, so the expectations are a bit different. However, you notice it less in the city, because in the city it's simply quiet, electric quiet, since it's a plug-in. However, you can definitely hear it better at 120 when, well, the only thing making noise are the winter tires. So most of the noise comes from underneath. And here, all around, there's a pleasant silence. And of course, as always, thanks to PTAK Warsaw Expo for providing the venue for the recording. The Terramar's official price in Poland starts at 181,000 Polish zloty, with a 15,000 Polish zloty promotion on the mild hybrid version. Polish zloty lowers the price to 166,000. Polish zloty plug-in hybrids start at 194,000. Polish zloty ending at about 230,000 Polish zloty after the discount. Interestingly, a similarly sized Audi Q3 with the same drivetrain costs about the same, although Cupra offers a much richer Cupra. Skoda and Volkswagen succeeded by making a bigger SUV with a third row, but that approach didn't work for Cupra. Instead, Cupra needed an SUV that matures, not just grows in size. And that's exactly why the Terramar is neither the successor to the Formentor, nor, even more so, the equivalent of the Kodiaq. It's an example that in a world where everyone is growing, sometimes it's worth just sitting down with a coffee and thinking about what really matters to us. Thank you very much for watching this episode. Remember to subscribe and see you in the next videos. Bye.